All right, welcome to ABAJAM Chronicles. Okay, now first we'll stop the music and we'll get into video mode. Okay, I have my snacks. Excuse me, really nice whole grain Italian bread. A bunch of mixed sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds, and what else are these? Pistachios. Just some orange juice, a napkin, but enough of the snacking. Again, welcome to ABAJAM Chronicles, reading of my first book, Two Families Lost in Time. And as you can see, I'm outside underneath our steel gazebo where I live. And it's a screened gazebo, so no bugs, which is nice, although there's not too many bugs right now. It's kind of warm and sticky, and putting all this together, getting the camera out here, my laptop, and everything else, is a bit of just a nightmare. Now I know what movie people have to go through. But let's get to the reading, because we have guests coming over to visit my fiance, so we'll have to do this quickly and edit it later. Now, where do we leave off? Last week. Without thinking, I readily passed the plaques off to them. That's speaking about Albert passing off the plaques that he had retrieved from the alien spacecraft to his son and Stevie, his son's friend, and then allowed them to assist me out of the murky, muddy water. Once out of the cold water, I sat down and took a well-deserved rest on a large nearby rock. Now we're going into Only Time Will Tell, Chapter 8. Let me get a little more comfortable here. "What are these things, Mr. Meisner?" Steve curiously asked, concerning the plaques, eyeing them suspiciously. "Boy, do you stink, Dad. What's that gooey stuff all over you?" was the first of many questions Jason and Stevie had for me. "Boys, one thing at a time," I insisted. "I am exhausted and just narrowly escaped that thing. Not to mention, I've just had the most unimaginably bizarre experience of my life. As for why I smell so bad, there's some sort of slick, but it ain't oil that's sticking to me. It seems like I picked up quite a lot, too. Funny thing, though, it didn't stick to me before. I had to wonder if this ooze sticking to me had anything to do with me being exposed to the atmosphere of the spaceship, or was this a different substance than what I had initially encountered when I swam out the second time. Where are my socks and shoes? I asked Jason. Jason passed off the plaques, and I handed him to Stevie, retrieved my shoes with the socks in them, and handed them to me. I slipped them on and glanced up to see what was happening to the spaceship I had just escaped. It appeared to be slowly churning its way to the middle of the narrow lake. Lights flickered and flashed through the cockpit window, no doubt from those numerous small onboard explosions. Soon sparks and plumes of both light and dark smoke began to spew forth from the crippled craft. I sadly shook my head at the spectacle unfolding before us, sighed and mumbled to myself, "Too bad a rescue is now out of the question." In the intervening time that it took to reach the boys, a bustle of activity was happening among the campsites along the southern shore. Windows and porch lights throughout the camp were being switched on. I could now clearly hear and see doors opening and screen doors slamming, even from this distance. There was all manner of commotion and clamor erupting throughout the campsite. Beams from flashlights panned wildly across the dark sky and swept across the lake's surface. Weary and irate people whose sleep had been disturbed by the prolonged blast of my truck's air horns, or so I assumed. "Well, boys, congratulations. It looks as though you finally raised the dead blowing the truck's air horn. Now perhaps some people will come our way. Regrettably, it's going to be too late. It's going to be too little and way too late." "Sorry, Dad. Me and Stevie stopped blowing the air horn a while ago. The truck stalled and the air ran out. You were gone so long we were getting really worried and didn't know what to do. Then the plane's engine started up and all those flashes started happening." My watch had stopped, but I wasn't gone that long, I said. "I figure no more than 15 minutes, tops. What time is it now, anyway?" "We don't know, Mr. Meisner," acknowledged Stevie. "All those clocks in the truck stopped. Even both our watches stopped working. but you were gone way over an hour. That's impossible, I objected, somewhat bewildered. The swim only took several minutes each way, give or take. I was only inside that thing a short while before all hell broke loose. You guys must be wrong, I insisted, feeling somewhat nonplussed. Well, leave it for now. We'll figure out the correct time later. Right now, let's just watch and see what happens to that thing. I stood up between them, and the three of us stared out onto the lake towards the spaceship. We all watched intently, following it, as it slowly powered its way to the middle of the lake. Where's that airplane going, Dad? Was anybody on board? Jason asked, completely mystified at the turn of events. Well, for your interest, boys, I began nonchalantly, that's neither a plane, a jet, nor a rocket ship we're looking at. It's a spaceship with real aliens on board. Both boys stared at me wide-eyed in complete disbelief. I kid you not, I answered their unasked question without altering my somewhat wistful facial expression. All of them were dead, except for one, that is. And as you can see, I pointed in the direction of the fleeing spacecraft. Whatever it is, it doesn't want to be rescued. Before anyone could say anything else, the spacecraft nose, or so I assume, because that's where I had entered, reared up and quickly slipped backwards into the black abyss of the lake. Off to our right, in the distance, more noise, lights, and a generally disorganized tumult was being raised as the cottagers and campers, now all awake, prepared to launch their flotilla in an attempted rescue bid. For all their noble efforts, it would have been too late anyway. A smile broke out across my face as I mused at what their response might have been had they arrived on time, only to discover what I had discovered. I was by myself. How would they have reacted, being in a group? We'll never know that either, that's for sure. At least I had my two plaques as evidence, proof positive that I was actually on board an alien spaceship, and I never even got probed. Haha. Well, boys, that's it. Nothing much more we can do here. She's sunk out of sight, so we might as well head back to the truck. For some unexplained reason, I felt both remorseful as well as an urgent need to leave the area as soon as possible. I wasn't at all interested in talking to or sharing any of my recent experiences with those local campers, at least not tonight. Do you think they'll ever find that thing you said was a spaceship at the bottom of this lake? Asked Stevie, obviously still somewhat skeptical. Mark my words, by late morning there will be more boats and divers swarming around the crash site than boom, whoosh! My sentence was abruptly interrupted by a huge plume of water cascading high up into the night sky from the approximate location where the spacecraft had sunk. It was immediately followed by a loud, deafening explosion. All three of us were simultaneously knocked to the ground, hard on our asses by the explosion, accompanying the enormous shockwave. The three of us just sat there stunned, completely overwhelmed at what we had just witnessed. We sat there in total silence, other than the large waves created by the explosion, now starting to crash along the shore, blanketing the whole area. Even the cottagers at the campsite off in the distance seemed to have fallen into a stunned and muted silence. It wasn't too long before we heard the shouts and pleas for rescue coming out of the dark from somewhere out on the lake. Obviously, the faster boats proceeding to the rescue site had been swamped by the waves caused by the ship's explosion. At least other boats were hurrying to their location. We couldn't see too much from our vantage point. Besides, rendering any kind of assistance was beyond our capabilities. Been there, done that. By the time the night had fully moved in to swallow us in its overpowering darkness. There was very little left to be seen in the emptiness of that northern Ontario night, other than the shadows cast from the truck's headlights and the dim lights from the rescue boats and their distant campsites. We sat there for what seemed to us to have been a long time. At least to me it did. In reality, it turned out to be no more than 10 minutes. I know, because when out of habit I looked at my watch, it was working again. So, too, were the boys' watches. It was a remarkable and curious component that only added to the overall mystery of the night's events. Add to that the no small coincidence that not only had all three of our watches resumed working, but each one displayed the same time. And if that wasn't enough to introduce Rod Sterling and the Twilight Zone's theme music, how about the fact that even my truck's clocks were in synchronicity with our watches, and all indicated we had been here from our first sighting to the burning spacecraft till now, a mere quarter of an hour. Of course, I could only speculate, but I explained it to the boys as some sort of electromagnetic interference generated by the alien spaceship's engines. They didn't have a clue what I was talking about. They probably still thought I was kind of crazy. Then again, so did I. But that explanation would have to suffice for now. It also seemed strange that all the while we sat there, no curious campers, no boats, nobody attempted to approach us, even though they could clearly see us from their location. It is reasonably possible that they only thought of us as curious onlookers who had stopped along the side of the road to observe all the commotion. It was the dampness and cold, not forgetting to mention the ever-increasing population of mosquitoes, that finally stirred us back to our senses and my previous longing to want to promptly leave the area. In our haste, I, without thinking, allowed each of the boys to carry a plaque back to the truck. Once in the light of the truck, I discovered I still had considerable residue from the slick's purplish ooze clinging to me. Unintentionally, I had passed off some of the stuff onto the boys when they assisted me out of the water. Even the plaques themselves were coated with the ooze, thus further contaminating them. My only excuse was to blame it all on the excitement and the distraction of mind at having actually experienced an alien encounter. To be perfectly honest, I wasn't gravely concerned with my exposure to the alien substance or the fact of having contaminated the boys. After brief consideration, I determined my negligence was minimal and understandably unavoidable. I can't explain my lack of concern other than having a notion, somewhere in the back of my mind, that this stuff wasn't harmful to us whatsoever. Jason and Stevie both looked disheveled in their wrinkled wet t-shirts and jeans, hair still damp and tousled from being out in the rain. In no time they had changed into dry clothes. By the time we dried ourselves off and changed clothes, the time on all our timepieces indicated 11:45 p.m. At that time, I suspected it was more likely closer to 12:45 a.m., but we wouldn't know for sure until we got in range of or found the local radio station. What was equally unusual and somewhat unsettling was the whole time we were parked along on the side of the road, not a single vehicle passed by. Boy, I really would hate to break down along here, especially if it were during the winter. As I pulled away from the shoulder, one thing was becoming quite evident. My pre-trip driving plan was all but shot to hell, which meant I wasn't going to get much sleep either tonight or tomorrow, or should I say today. Whatever day it was going to be a long one. Even with my two prizes and unique once-in-a-lifetime encounter, I more than likely would be in a miserable mood, and so I forewarned the boys accordingly. For the remainder of the trip, about a 30-minute drive to the Esso truck stop in Timmins, no one spoke or asked any questions, but the silence didn't last. By the time we reached the truck stop, which incidentally also seemed to take forever, the boys let loose a barrage of questions, making me reconstruct and describe in detail, at least 2 or 3 times, all the events and images I had witnessed and what all transpired while I was deep within the spaceship. During that brief time, at each retelling, I was able to recall with greater clarity more and more details, both the outside and the inside of the craft, no matter how minute or trivial. I could see by their wide and eager eyes they were listening with rapt attention, believing me more and more as time picked up speed. Jason, checking my map book, found out the spaceship had crashed into the narrow man-made lake called Kenogamissi. When Stevie heard me describe the plaques as possible control modules, he suggested we call them modules instead of plaques. Modules seem so much more mechanical than plaques. I had no problem with calling them modules, and so we all agreed to call them that. The boys finally settled down after about an hour of interrogating me, climbing into the lower bunk to sleep head to feet. I drew the privacy curtain around the windshield and climbed into the top bunk. I was not anticipating a good night's sleep. I abandoned any thoughts of turning on the radio to hear the correct time in order to set my alarm. First of all, sunshine and the bustle of morning activity at truck stops usually roused me from my sleep, no matter how tired I was. Today should be no different. Secondly, far too much was running through my mind. Even the boys below me sounded restless. Upon waking in the morning, I was pleased to discover I felt fully rested. It was as if I'd gotten a regular night's sleep. Even the boys, once they wiped the sleep from their eyes, both testified to having had a good night's sleep. Yet we could not have gotten, by my calculations, more than 4.5 hours. I had no doubt we'd all be paying for sleep deprivation sooner or later in the day. I drew back the curtain to what looked to be a gloriously bright and sunny day. So much for long-range weather forecasts, I smirked. What was most unusual was many of the trucks that were here upon our arrival were still parked on the muddy potted gravel lot. I had taken it to be late in the morning. Most of these trucks should have been gone by now. I turned on the radio and found Timmins Q92. When the announcer reported the time to be 7:15 in the morning, I was totally flabbergasted to discover all our watches and trucks' clocks were right on time. As it turned out, we did get a reasonably good night's sleep. Either that or Q92 was running on a different time zone, like Pacific time zone, for instance. And that's the end of Chapter 8. Next week, we'll read Chapter 9, Invasion of the Body, Brain Snatchers Revisited. I hope you all enjoyed this reading. I did, because it was short. And, of course, I'm outside. And other than that, have yourself a great weekend. And we'll be looking forward to next week's reading with all of you joining me. And don't forget to click on the like button and subscribe to this video. It would help me out a lot. Mom will go to the house and go change and go swimming.